look myself in the mirror and accept that if you weren't a racist, you condone what a racist did. So that's, to me, the same thing. It's the same thing. So
I agree with you completely.
Sounds to really make you rub and scrub. Swing badang badang bong biddly biddly bong. Bong biddly 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 bong. I said, pass the dutchie on the left hand side. Pass the dutchie on the left hand side. It a go bun.
Anthony, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invite.
I appreciate it.
You got a big show. You got a big following. So God bless you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Both of you, welcome to the show. I greatly appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, and good morning.
The floor is yours.
Whatever it is, it'll keep till the morning. Haven't we both got better things to do? Midnight blue.
I'm on your side, I still care. I may have died, but I've gone nowhere. Just think of me, I'll be there. Just think of me, I'll be there. There you go. Bit rusty.
Oh. You know what? I gotta tell you, usually I make my guests get a little emotional if I find something that touches them. You got me this time. So viewers, you're always telling me you got this one emotional. That got me emotional. I had to wipe my eyes.
No.
Since you told me you've seen some of the shows already, welcome, Johnny, of course. You know the running joke on my show is, because you're 6 hours ahead of me,
Oh, yeah.
I need the lottery numbers.
What do
But
you mean? These ones?
there you go. I love it.
I'm
There
one
you
step
go.
ahead of you, man.
Hey, folks, the man with the pinky ring and the New York thing. Forget about it. Bad Brad Berkwitt, and you're watching another episode of the Bad Brad Berkwitt Show on the Ringside Report web TV channel. Now hit that button, whatever corner it is, and subscribe. Leave your comments below. Let's have a conversation. I always reply to comments left on my videos. As long as they're not fugazis, forget about it. Now, today, I have a very special guest and some very special topics to talk about. Many of you, like me, have been affected by someone that we loved that passed away from dementia, Alzheimer's, or a form of. For me, it was my Navy mentor, Leo Halpin. I would have never got into the intelligence field if it was not for Leo, who I met in 1987 when I was stationed at Naval Hospital, Pensacola, and I was working in a different field, and then I went into intelligence thanks to him. He passed away in 2014 in a nursing home. Sadly, didn't even recognize his wife, Shirley, anymore, who has subsequently passed away a couple of years later. So very, very touching for me. I know when his press release came out, a lot of people said they had a loved one that passed away of dementia. So this show is for you as well. My guest today is the executive director of LEAD Coalition, which stands for Leaders Engaged on Alzheimer's Disease. And my guest is from the DMV, and we're going to talk about a lot of different topics today. So make sure you tune into the show. And please welcome Ian Kremer. All right, everybody. First of all, I'd like to welcome you to the show, Ian. Good afternoon to you.
Afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on. A lot of people, when they saw the press release, are very interested in hearing about what we discussed today. And it means a lot to them because, as we'll get into it, they've lost a family member or a friend to Alzheimer's, dementia. And I actually have a question from somebody later on in the interview that I'll ask you. But what I always do is I always start out like this. You're in the DMV area. How are you dealing with COVID personally, professionally, and so on?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's COVID's affected everybody one way or another. And for my family, we've been lucky. My wife and my son and I have all remained healthy. My wife and my son both have their first injections, and news came out today. I live in Virginia in the DC suburbs, and news came out today from our governor that everybody 16 and over should be eligible to sign up by, I think it's April 16th. So maybe it's 18th, but in any event, I'm 2 or 3 weeks away from being able to get my name on a list. So we're 1/3 vaccinated in our immediate family, and soon 100% hopefully. And my dad also lives in Northern Virginia. He's fully vaccinated, which he got done a while back, which is great because he's older and quite frail. So personally, we're doing great, but as you full well know, lots of people are really struggling. We've lost so many people to this disease, and the reality is COVID's going to take a lot more people over generations to come, because we've got the long haulers and the not fully realized implications of what this is doing to people's overall health picture. So it's a calamity that will not end when everybody's vaccinated. It's going to have decades to play out. That's frankly pretty terrifying overall for everybody's health, but certainly in terms of the neurocognitive symptoms that we're starting to see already with people that are surviving, but really struggling with their cognition.
Okay. All right, looking at your bio and stuff, it looked like you were born in St. Louis, but you grew up in Manhattan, Kansas.
Yes, the Little Apple.
And I always get a kick out of that because Debbie and I, before we moved here, we lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and my other side of my profession is I cover boxing, and they had a Miami, Oklahoma, and everybody's like, Miami, these cities. So it's not Manhattan, New York, it's Manhattan, Kansas, which is
right.
Talk about growing up in Manhattan, Kansas. What was it like, and so on?
Yeah, so I grew up in Manhattan in the 70s and 80s, and my parents, we moved there because my dad had a faculty position at Kansas State in the Department of Architecture, and a number of years later, my mom began teaching at the university as well. So they spent most of their professional careers attached to Kansas State, and it was a good time to grow up there. The K-State men's basketball was terrific in the 70s, so that was fun for me as a kid. I could literally walk to the old Ahern Field House on campus and see games, and the stands would literally rock. It was a good, quiet, comfortable, safe place for a kid to grow up. Could ride my bike to friends' houses, and just my elementary school, my middle school, and my high school. So it was an intimate community and a close-knit university community. So great place to grow up.
Okay. And I don't know if it was Manhattan, Kansas, but for some reason the movie The Manhattan Project comes up in my mind. Was that Manhattan, Kansas?
No.
Okay.
That was actually all over the country.
Okay.
But a lot of the Manhattan Project was headquartered in New Mexico, but there were scientific facilities all over the country, really prominent facility in Tennessee as well. But I'm not aware of the Manhattan Project actually having any connections to the state of Kansas, but it's certainly possible there was a lab at KU or K-State or someplace that was involved or sent scientists to it.
Okay. Looking at your bio, it looks like you hold degrees from Washington University in St. Louis and University of Michigan School of Law. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you work as an attorney?
No, not a day in my life, not so much as a summer job, but it's a great way to learn more about how to think critically, and it was great preparation for the work that I've done through most of my career. If you want to understand how to make law, you need to have some idea of how that law is going to be interpreted by agencies that are responsible for implementing the law, and then for courts that might wind up reviewing it.
Okay. Now, it looks like you have worked on federal, state, and local dementia policy since about 1996. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Before we get into that part, what led you on that journey to go into that type of work?
Yeah, it's a little bit of dumb luck and a little bit of intention. Before law school, I'd worked on pension policy from a consumer nonprofit point of view, and trying to make sure that older adults were secure in their retirement, at least that portion of their retirement that had to do with their pensions. And that really stimulated a significant interest in that area of law, and that's part of why I went to law school. And And then when I came out of law school, the dumb luck kicked in. My wife happened to see an ad in the Washington Post for a local chapter of the Alzheimer's Association that was looking to hire somebody to do policy for them. And that was the state and local policy that I wound up doing for about 15 years. Like many families, mine's been touched by Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. So before taking on that work role, I'd lost 2 grandparents to dementia. And that certainly had a profound effect on my decision to pursue that job opening. And then I think my ability to do the work, hopefully effectively, that I had a personal narrative to share. And then over the course of the 15 years that I did that work, I got to know a lot of other families that were going through this or already had, and to get a wider perspective than my own family's N of 2. And then I got recruited away after a little more than 15 years with the association to the lead coalition, and that's where I made the pivot to more federal policy work.
Okay. Now I want to read something to you. I know you know what this means, but for the viewers, and then I want to ask you about this. People say dementia and others say Alzheimer's. In reading up on it, I know, like I said, I know that you know this. I found that Alzheimer's disease is a degenerative brain disease and the most common form of dementia. Dementia is not a specific disease. It's an overall term that describes a group of symptoms. Would you say that was correct as a definition, layman's definition?
Yeah, that's perfect. So a lot of times, and you and I are friends on Twitter, you'll see this meme on Twitter of an umbrella. Mm-hmm. So think of dementia as an umbrella term, and you're exactly right. It's a set of symptoms, and those symptoms can vary a lot, not only individual to individual, but based on what's under that umbrella in terms of the specific disease they've got. So there are literally 100 medical conditions that can cause any variety of symptoms that fall under that umbrella term of dementia. But the symptoms are going to be different based on which disease it is, and then on you as an individual. So there's a saying in our movement: if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia, and it's not necessarily going to be reflective of what the next person will experience. There will be some broad similarities. You know, it's, as you rightly said, it's a degenerative neurological condition. So we're talking about the ability to think and reason and remember. But I'll just give you one example. Sure. Alzheimer's disease, most of us are more familiar with that than the other diseases that can cause dementia. That one is not uniquely about memory loss, but that's usually the first major obvious symptom. There are other things that might be going on before the memory problems emerge that a trained eye might look out for, but memory is really what we think about with Alzheimer's dominantly as a culture. There's another condition called frontotemporal degeneration. Very rare relative to Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's, there are more than 5 million Americans living with it at any given time. FTD, there are about 60,000 Americans. That one, you rarely see memory problems initially. They may come over time, but typically with FTD, which often strikes younger adults, not in their 20s, but often in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, there it's much more behavioral change. It's around judgment and loss of inhibition and things like that. So just very different kinds of initial symptomatic profiles, but they both fall under that umbrella of dementia.
Okay. I can't remember if it was Robin Williams or it was a more of a recent celebrity, and I probably pronounced it wrong, but Lou something with an L, body Lou something. Yeah.
So Lewy Body is another one of these diseases.
Okay, is that what he had, Ian? Did Robin Williams have that?
So there's a little uncertainty about that. Okay. And I'll confess, I have not dug into this enough to be sure if they ever got a definitive answer. There was certainly suspicion that he had dementia with Lewy Bodies.
Okay.
I don't know if that was 100% confirmed upon autopsy or whether an autopsy was actually even done for Robin Williams. But his symptoms seem to fit that profile. So whether Robin Williams specifically had Lewy body dementia or not, hundreds of thousands of Americans do, possibly over 1 million. It's a really significant, widespread disease. Very little is understood about it. A lot of good science being done, but it doesn't have the public attention that it deserves. I will say 25 years ago, Alzheimer's didn't have the public attention it deserved. We've done a lot better raising awareness about dementia, not so great about destigmatizing it and really having full, robust, accurate understanding, but there's a lot of awareness around Alzheimer's. Tony Bennett recently revealed his diagnosis.
Yep.
And it's a godsend when public figures reveal this really sad news, but important to demystify what these diseases are about. And with Robin Williams, if he had Lewy body dementia or he didn't, his story allows a lot of other people to come forward and learn more about what may be in their lives and talk to their physician.
Okay. Folks, just the viewers that know that that's Santino, he likes to be on the camera. So when Ian said Tony Bennett, Santino being half Italian is a Tony Bennett fan. So that was a bark for Tony Bennett. Be quiet, Santino. Okay. As well, we talked earlier about COVID in your area. How is COVID affecting people with Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so where to begin? In every aspect of their lives. That's true for a lot of people across this country, but part of the complexity in answering your question is Alzheimer's is not one thing. You know, a lot of people have this, if they haven't seen it up close and personal, they think of Alzheimer's in a way that's really more reflective of mid and late stage disease. They don't often think about it in terms of early stage disease. So here's the distinction. It has to do with degree and magnitude of the impact on your ability to think and reason and remember. So when you're in a middle or late stage of the disease, that's where the confusion is most profound, and certainly much more than in an early stage of disease. So for people that are in that more profoundly confused portion of the disease, having a pandemic is utterly confusing. There are literally probably a handful of Americans who lived through the 1918-1919 flu pandemic. So for virtually everybody in this country and around the world, this is a novel experience going through a true pandemic. So it's hard enough for those of us that at least believe we're cognitively intact to wrap our heads around this. And the remarkable, shocking, deeply saddening debates about basic public health responsibilities.
Yeah.
People like us struggle with that.
Yes.
Imagine if you have a cognitive impairment on top of that, and then somebody saying you have to wear a mask, and everyone around you has to wear a mask, and you're not allowed to see your loved ones if you live in an assisted living facility and your loved ones don't, or a nursing home. And it's not safe to go to the movie theater anymore. It's not safe to go to the doctor's office anymore. That doesn't make sense for a lot of everyday average Americans without cognitive impairment. I should say, I am fully in support of aggressive public health measures around COVID-19. I'm just acknowledging there are tens of millions of Americans that don't get it,
Right.
and they don't have a cognitive impairment. So then when you layer on a cognitive impairment, imagine how much more challenging it is
Yes.
to persuade someone with a cognitive impairment that they have to remain 6 to 12 feet apart from people they've always been able to go up and hold and hug.
Right.
So it's terrible in that sense. But again, think about the social isolation. You know, we've gotten this message about social distancing, which really ought to have been messaged as physical distancing,
Right.
rather than social. But the social isolation happens either way. And people living with cognitive impairment are often terribly socially isolated regardless of COVID. And then you impose COVID on top of that, and it just makes it that much worse. So many people living with dementia tell stories accurately about how their friends and family, many friends and family, faded away once they learned that their loved one or their friend had this disease that we call Alzheimer's, or this disease we call FTD, or this disease we call Lewy body, because they don't know how to handle it.
Right.
And they're scared of it. And none of these diseases are contagious, but there's a fear that somehow maybe it is. Well, if there was already a lot of social isolation going on, people fading out of your life when they find out you have this terrible and confusing disease, and then you get a pandemic on top of it, where we're being told to remove ourselves from the company, especially of vulnerable older adults, medically fragile people, it just compounds those problems. And that's before we even get into the unmitigated disaster of the failing of government at all levels on the logistics of handling the pandemic, which just brutally compounded the pain, the suffering, and the death toll for people dealing with dementia.
Okay. I had one person that affected me, my Navy mentor. His name was Leo Halpin, and he got it in his 70s, middle 70s. And he had to be put in a nursing home because he didn't know who his wife Shirley was anymore. And he got angry. He got angry, and he came at her because he didn't know who she was. So he felt like she was an intruder in their house.
Right.
Laying in the same bed. He just didn't know her anymore. Is there something specific, or maybe it's not so much a general question, but what is it that causes the anger, besides for the frustration that something's wrong? Because, you know, as you said, some people know something's wrong with them, but then they get to a state where they really don't know anything anymore, or to an extent that they're like totally confused. But where does the anger, because I hear that a lot of anger comes in with this disease.
Yeah, absolutely. So it comes from a number of places. And I just want to reemphasize, I'm not a clinician. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a researcher. I hang out with a bunch of them, and I've gotten to know literally thousands of families and individuals living with dementia over the last 25 years, plus my own family experience. But you know, that's anecdotal experience times however much. It's not professional experience. Okay. So I do want to make sure all your viewers understand I'm not giving any medical advice. Okay. And the only advice I can give people is, if you have a concern, if there's something you don't understand, talk with experts, real experts, your family physician, specialists that your family physician might refer you to. But let me tackle head on this issue of anger and other so-called behavioral circumstances around Alzheimer's and other diseases that cause dementia. Look, part of it is human nature. If you're struggling to think and remember and make decisions, that's frustrating. And if you've gotten news that you have a diagnosis of a terminal, incurable disease, which all forms of dementia are, with some exceptions that I'll note in a moment, but the dominant forms are incurable. Things like Alzheimer's, we have no cure, no means of slowing the progression or stopping the progression of the disease yet. If you get that devastating news, you're going to be angry and or depressed. But I think your question, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, it doesn't go so much to the emotional reaction to the day-to-day struggle. No, I'm looking more. It has to do with the confusion.
Yes.
Yeah. So that confusion is quite understandable. You know, think about how any of us would react if we didn't understand the environment in which we were expected to live our lives. If we didn't recognize people that, I'll just give you a concrete example, whether it's your wife of 50 years or whether it's a care aide in a long-term care residence. If somebody's trying to undress you and put you in a shower that may be too hot or too cold, you're going to be mad. You're going to be scared. You're going to react. And imagine if you've also, because of the underlying medical conditions, seen your ability to communicate verbally become impaired, maybe wiped out completely. Sometimes that's Alzheimer's disease or one of these other diseases that causes dementia. Sometimes it's a co-occurring medical condition that compromises your ability to just say what's on your mind and express verbally your worry, your fear, your concern, your frustration. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to physically lash out and try to push that person away. And sometimes that is perceived as hitting, as opposed to trying to defend yourself against this stranger who's trying to undress you and put you under a too hot or too cold shower, or force a fork toward your mouth. And you don't know why they're doing that, because your ability to comprehend the circumstance has changed, and it's a defense mechanism. And all of that, and these are just anecdotes I'm giving, examples of what could be a much more varied array of circumstances. That's before you even get to the possibility that some people living with Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia may be experiencing hallucinations and delusions. So the circumstance with your former mentor is that he literally didn't recognize this woman who was trying to interact with him. And she had all good intentions, and she may have been physically and emotionally approaching it exactly right, but he just couldn't process it. But imagine if he didn't see her as an older woman acting physically appropriately, approaching at eye level, slow motions, etc. Imagine if he pictured her visually, he was having hallucinations where she looked like an enemy soldier if he had a military background.
Right, yeah, he did.
Yeah, so he may have seen her as a North Korean soldier or a German soldier or what was relevant to his lived experience. He may have seen her as the bully from when he was 6 years old.
Okay, yeah.
We don't know. But a lot of people living with Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia do either episodically or on a long-term basis experience hallucinations and delusions. To be sure, not all, but a significant subset. And we have to have better ways to identify that and then to treat it both medically and in terms of how we approach day-to-day care.
Okay. About 2012, you started serving as executive director of LEAD Coalition, which is Leaders Engaged on Alzheimer's Disease, uniting the voice of over 200 member and allied organizations. If you would, give the viewers a layman insight to LEAD.
Yeah, so I guess up front I'll say two things. I hate the name for two reasons. We're not just about Alzheimer's disease, so I inherited an organizational name that had just the word Alzheimer's in it, but we're really about any disorder that results in those symptoms of dementia. And then the other part is leaders and lead. I don't know. We don't have to claim credit for leading everything. A good coalition is about lifting up the efforts of all the organizations that participate. And as you alluded to, some are members, some are non-member allies. If they're doing good work, we want to lift it up. And we want to bring groups together so that they can share that lift and collaborate as much as possible to do more good and create more positive change in the world. So at the end of the day, while we're organized as a federal public policy coalition around Alzheimer's and related forms of dementia, and I'm a policy guy, so I can see almost everything through a policy lens, we do lots of work and we support lots of work that most people don't see through a policy lens. And I'll give you one example. We, on the policy side, we do the obvious stuff. We try to get Congress to invest more, both in science to try to address Alzheimer's, but also in the care and services and supports programs to help people that are already living that experience. But on the other side, an example of something, again, I'll tell you if you want how I see it through a policy lens, but most people don't choose to see it or don't need to see it through a policy lens. There's an initiative called Dementia Friendly America. And we were one of the organizations that helped create that initiative and has sustained it for the last 7 or 8 years since it was launched. And it's an effort, very much what it sounds like, hopefully, at an organic community level. People come together and decide how they want to make their community or their part of their community more dementia friendly. So I'll give you an analogy. Most of us know about cut curbs and electronic doors.
Yes.
When you're walking in your neighborhood and the curb slopes down when you come to the end of the sidewalk. Well, that was designed initially and envisioned initially to assist people with mobility disabilities. People using walkers, wheelchairs, etc. But it benefits all of us. Same thing with electric sliding doors on public buildings, grocery stores, government buildings, etc. For the benefit of people with mobility and vision impairments. We all benefit from that. You can do a lot of things to make a community more dementia accessible and supportive that are intended and designed with that population in mind, but that benefit all of us. And I'll give you a concrete example. one of the ways that a community might decide it wants to work on becoming more dementia friendly is to work with its local banks to make sure that they're more sensitive to warning signs of financial exploitation of older adults.
Yeah.
Huge problem.
Makes sense.
Yeah, not only for people with dementia, but especially for people with dementia. Just an enormous problem, and terrible stories that we'll get into maybe another time. But if banks are more sensitized to the risk of elder financial exploitation, well, then they're more sensitized to exploitation and scams that can affect all people, all their customers. That's good for all of us. It's about educating that bank community to be more attuned to the vulnerabilities of all their constituents through a particular lens that can then be expanded in its view. And you could say this for all the ways in which communities could be more dementia friendly. When a community works with its local law enforcement to be more sensitive to the fact that sometimes people with dementia might not understand that they're in the middle of a grocery store, department store, public park. They might misperceive and think they're at home, and so they start undressing. That's not a flasher. Yeah. That's somebody who's confused.
Yes.
And if they pull somebody over for weaving in and out of a lane or going too fast, that might not be somebody who's intoxicated or under the influence of drugs. It might be somebody who has a cognitive impairment that's affecting their vision or their judgment or their ability to multitask and read a speed sign as well as watch the road. So when they pull that person over and treat them in a respectful, inquisitive way rather than an accusatory way, well, that lesson can translate for people that are dealing with mental health issues, vision impairment issues, autism issues. It makes the police more sensitive to the variability of the citizens they might encounter in a traffic stop.
Okay. You made me just think of something not even on the paper. Is there a statistic, a percentage? Because in my mind, I'm thinking now of the things that you said, people that are going to prison that actually have dementia and they're involved in something, but they're it's not a BS plea that there's something wrong with it, because we know a lot of times lawyers do that. Yeah. But I mean, legitimate cases where someone had dementia and they were involved in something and they went to prison, which isn't the answer if they got dementia, because as you said, they're only going to get worse. Is there a statistic on that?
So it's a good question. I'll confess, if there is, I don't know it. Most people that are incarcerated go in younger than typical ages of onset of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, other forms. So I don't think it's a big population that are being wrongly incarcerated in the first instance because the court failed to recognize, or their defense attorney failed to recognize, that they had a cognitive impairment that was responsible for their conduct. That said, there are a lot of people serving time who develop Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia after they're behind bars. And, particularly because of the 3 strikes laws, where a lot of people, and I apologize, I don't know the numbers on this, a lot of people got sent away for life, where before those 3 strikes laws, they might have been sent away for 5 or 10 years. Yes. And so they're wallowing into their 70s, 80s, and 90s in prison for things that they ordinarily in the past would have been released in their 40s or 50s for. That's where we're headed. And prisons are a terrible place to live with dementia. They're just not equipped to deal with it. And that prison population of people with dementia is exploding.
Well, that's interesting you said that. The name slips me, the title, but it just came out. Michael B. Jordan, and Jamie Foxx played the prisoner. I can't think of the name of the movie. Deb and I just saw it last year. And he went away, and he was actually innocent. They put him in for years. And he got out. They proved that he was innocent. I don't know. It wasn't Just Cause, I don't think. I can't think of the name of it. And prison brought on, and he wound up dying. He had dementia. He got out. He was freed because he was wrongly accused for all those years. But prison, as you said, brought on dementia, which is tragic on top of him being convicted for something he didn't do. So as you said, and I've heard stories, it's only a horrible place if you have it or you get it. It's not a good situation.
Right. Yeah. And Brad, do you mind if I jump in for a moment?
Yeah, go ahead.
So just to clarify, there's nothing I'm aware of. Again, I'm not a researcher. There's nothing I'm aware of that suggests that being in prison causes Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia, at least not directly. That said, a lot of people, they just age in place in prison long enough that whatever else might be the actual medical cause of developing Alzheimer's disease or another condition that results in the symptoms of dementia, that has time to manifest. The caveat is there is increasing evidence, not proven beyond a doubt yet, but increasingly strong and more evidence piling up, that depression and social isolation, which are related, can contribute to the onset of Alzheimer's disease. Not necessarily other forms of dementia, but maybe that's just where the body of evidence has developed so far. Maybe if we did more research about frontotemporal dementia or vascular dementia or other forms, maybe we'd find some indications of causation there too. It's just that the greatest risk factor for developing Alzheimer's is age. It's not a normal part of aging, but it's a common part of aging. And typical age of onset is after age 65, not at 65, but after. So roughly 10% of people over age 65, all the way up to 110-year-olds, have Alzheimer's. By the time you reach 85, it's somewhere between a third and half of people 85 and over. So my point here is, as the prison population ages, you're just naturally going to have more people in prison who are living with Alzheimer's disease, dementia, and maybe other forms of dementia as well. It's a statistical issue more than necessarily a causal issue.
Okay. One case that again, not even on the paper coming back to me, was in the 80s, Rita Hayworth, who was a big movie star.
Yep.
And they used to say, oh, she was drunk, she was this, she was that, but she actually had, I'm not saying she didn't drink, but she had Alzheimer's or dementia, which was proven. Do you know, or any idea, when were like the first cases of Alzheimer's when they've said, this is what this is?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I'll give you the short version of the history. Okay. Partly because I don't know, all the steps along the way, but the first documented case and where we get the name Alzheimer is from 1907, I believe. Apologies if it's 1906. But there was a Dr. Alzheimer who had a patient who was, I believe, 51 at the time, who was exhibiting things that we would call dementia. I don't know that they were using that word at the time, but upon autopsy, he was able to examine her brain and find some of the telltale physical characteristics in her brain tissue that he categorized as this disease that wound up getting named after him. So in that technical sense, we go back about 100 years, but if you look at historical records describing this syndrome, not naming it, but describing it, and that's in historical documents, but also in literature. There are references to things we would recognize today as dementia, maybe specifically Alzheimer's, dating back literally thousands of years. It's just most people didn't live long enough to be at risk for Alzheimer's particularly. Now, the Rita Hayworth thing that you mentioned is really interesting. In part, what caught my ear in that mention is the drinking. Mm-hmm. One of the things that can bring on dementia, it doesn't cause Alzheimer's disease, but it causes dementia. The symptoms is alcohol abuse. Now, that doesn't mean everybody who abuses alcohol is going to wind up with dementia. Absolutely not. But it means it's one of the risk factors for dementia. There is an alcohol-related dementia. And this goes back to a point I was making earlier. There are 100 medical conditions that can result in this broad and diverse set of symptoms we call as an umbrella dementia. Most of them are not curable or even able to be arrested by medical intervention. Okay. But some are things we can halt and even reverse and undo the damage. And that's why it's incredibly important when anyone is concerned for themselves or for someone they care about, that there's something not right. They're noticing a change in behavior, in memory, in thinking, in decision-making and judgment. that they talk with a physician about it, because there are a lot of things that masquerade as Alzheimer's disease that are not Alzheimer's disease. And they are treatable, and they are curable, and they are fixable. And Alzheimer's is not one of those. But if you'll give me the opportunity, I do want to come back to all the good things that happen when you know your diagnosis, even of an incurable disease like Alzheimer's.
Go for it.
But just about the curable kind. Alcohol abuse is one of those things. But let me give you another one that's even more common, and that is mini strokes. I'm not talking about the big catastrophic,
Right, yeah, right, I know what you're talking about.
nearly end your life stuff, but the mini strokes.
Yes.
Those are eminently treatable. And if you get mini strokes identified and treated early and effectively, the dementia goes away. Now, not for everybody,
Right.
but for a significant enough portion that it absolutely not just merits, but requires and demands that we give physicians an opportunity to help us and save us so that we don't have dementia as a permanent part of the rest of our lives. If you leave those mini strokes undetected or untreated, the damage is going to intensify, and dementia will take hold and will become permanent when it didn't have to. But if you don't mind me going on without taking a breath to why it's valuable to get a
Go for it.
diagnosis.
You got the platform.
Okay.
Go for it.
So I could spend 5 hours lamenting.
We'll do subsequent
Yeah,
shows.
another time. Lamenting all my frustrations about people not getting a timely and accurate diagnosis, even when it turns out to be one of these diseases that is currently not stoppable and not reversible, not curable, if you will. But let me give you a few examples. If you know what you do have, then you also know what you don't have. And I cannot begin to count the number of people that got the wrong diagnosis before they got the right one. And this is particularly an acute problem for people that get what's called young onset Alzheimer's disease. So I'm not talking about early stage. That's a different thing. You know, we all go through stages with any disability where it gets progressively worse, progressively better, maybe sort of weaves, it's episodic like some cancers are. I'm talking about early onset, young onset. So earlier I was saying most people that get Alzheimer's, it's
65.
somewhere after age 65,
Right.
often quite a bit after age 65, 75, 85, beyond. But there are people that get full-blown Alzheimer's disease as young as their 40s. And it's the last thing most family docs are looking for. If they see someone in their 40s or 50s who seems otherwise very healthy, who's exhibiting problems with memory or judgment or something else, they're going to think depression, they're going to think substance abuse, they're going to think psychiatric disorder. The doctor's mind is going to go every place before it goes to Alzheimer's, because most doctors aren't aware of or aren't tuned in to the possibility that they could be seeing an unusually young case of Alzheimer's disease. But there are over 200,000 Americans today living with that under age 65 variety of Alzheimer's disease. It's not all that rare. It's rare compared to the over 65s, where there are more than 5 million. But 200,000 is a lot of people. And docs miss it more often than not. And they diagnose something else. So you could go years being treated for depression that isn't the root cause of your cognitive problem, or treated for or accused of having a dependency problem that maybe you don't even have. But the doctor's convinced he must just be drinking too much. It's an anecdote, and it's a painful one, but a good friend of mine who had young onset Alzheimer's disease that was diagnosed when she was 51, she first started going to her doctor and reporting problems in her late 40s, 48, 49. Her doctor told her it was menopause. It wasn't menopause. Her doctor told her, well, your husband must be cheating on you, and that's why you're upset and depressed all the time and distracted at work. Her husband wasn't cheating on her.
What a wonderful doctor.
The doctor was doing the best he or she knew to do, but it wasn't enough. And it sent this woman down a 3-year journey of everything that wasn't wrong in her life being addressed, not the one thing that actually was wrong. And for her, when she found out the truth, Okay, she was pissed at the doctor who missed it for 3 years. And she was enormously grateful for the other doctor that figured it out.
Mhm.
She was depressed she'd gotten a death sentence, but she was liberated that she could do something with the rest of her life, however long that was going to be, in context. And she started volunteering for research studies around Alzheimer's, for care interventions as well as medical interventions. She and her husband built their dream house 15 years earlier than they otherwise would have if she had not had this diagnosis. She embraced life in a way she never had before. She volunteered for the Alzheimer's Association and counseled other people living with Alzheimer's disease. Her life was much richer once she knew what she was facing and knew what she wasn't, and she got off all the medications for the things she didn't have that her doctor thought maybe she did. So in some ways, her thinking got better for a while. The disease took its toll, but for a while, she had the clarity of being off all those antipsychotic drugs for the mental health problems she didn't have. And she had the opportunity to give back by volunteering for research, if not to help herself, to help the next generation. She also had the ability to make all of the decisions before the disease overtook her about what she wanted the rest of her life to be like. Because even though she was 3 years into symptoms, she was not deep into the progression of the disease. So she was able to do legal, financial, and medical decision-making as a full party to those decisions, not putting all the weight on her husband to guess what she would have wanted. It was first-person decision-making while she was still able and willing to do it. And she was able to make spiritual decisions and just bucket list decisions like building that dream house.
Right.
Knowledge is power.
Okay. You had mentioned, and another name popped in my head about somebody that was diagnosed, but they didn't have it. I don't know if you're aware of this, and this is, let me see, we lived in Tulsa, so it would have been around 14, 15, or 16, and it started on the tabloids and then People magazine and all that. And I think it was Chris Christopherson for some reason. I'm thinking they diagnosed Chris, and they said he had Alzheimer's, and he found out it wasn't. It was something, I can't remember what he wound up. Actually, you know what, for some reason, and I could be wrong about this, for some reason, Lyme disease is coming to me. And I don't know if that was the case. Did you ever hear about Chris Christopherson's deal?
So I don't remember hearing about Chris Christopherson specifically,
Okay.
but you know, that's another issue, that the autoimmune disorders sometimes can cause cognitive symptoms, and they aren't classic dementia. But so we don't have perfect answers on autoimmune disorders either. We need a lot more research there, and we need much better treatments and eventually cures. But it is important to know what disease you've got and what disease you don't. And if you're told you have Alzheimer's and you don't, you have Lyme disease, that means that your Lyme disease isn't being appropriately addressed.
Right.
So, and you might get put on the drugs that are available to treat the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. We don't have anything that changes the course of the disease, but we do have some drugs that are on market and have been for 15 or 16 years that for some people for a period of time will help modulate the symptoms, help a little with memory, help a little with judgment. And I really don't like the term behaviors, but that kind of bucket of how you respond to your environment and whether you can perceive it accurately enough to not feel threatened by your environment. So those drugs aren't perfect, but there's something. They're more than nothing. And I will say as an aside, we hope within the next 2 or 3 months that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration will make a ruling on the first potentially disease-modifying drug for Alzheimer's disease. Okay. We don't know what the ruling will be, but if that drug gets approved, it's probably going to be targeted at people that are very, very early in the course of Alzheimer's disease. So it won't be a home run. It's not going to be a cure-all for everyone, but it can start to change both the progression of the disease for those individuals that are eligible for this medication, but also the narrative around Alzheimer's, going from an incurable disease to a disease where we see our first glimmers of the possibility of providing a meaningful cure for more and more people. And that's the story in so many other diseases. You think about cancer, you know, there's still lots of people that die of cancer, but there are so many that are cured. 50 years ago, virtually no one was cured of any form of cancer, but something had to be first and begin to make a dent in that 100% mortality rate. And that opened a floodgate of research that got us to where we are today in cancer, where a lot of cancers are eminently treatable and curable. Not all, and not for everybody, but it's radically different. And I'll just, again, apologies, I'll give you one personal example. A little more than 25 years ago, my mom was diagnosed very much belatedly with having a late stage 3 breast cancer. And she went down to MD Anderson in Houston, world famous, world renowned, highly, just a remarkable cancer center. And the only treatment available for my mom at that stage of her disease was something that basically they had to nearly kill her to save her. And brutal treatment beyond what you can imagine. And she was in the hospital for more than 2 months. And it did save her. And she got roughly another 25 years of life.
Oh, wow. Compromised
health in more ways than I could tell you about today. But 25 years of life and a lot of blessings in those 25 years, personally and professionally. But if she'd gotten that diagnosis 5 or 10 years earlier, she absolutely would have been dead probably within a year. Mm. There would have been no chance of even trying to kill her to save her, because what she got were brand new experimental therapies that weren't available 5 and 10 years earlier. We're at the cusp of that in Alzheimer's. And where we'll be in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, I can't tell you, but something has to be first to open that door. Maybe it'll be this particular drug that FDA is reviewing now. Maybe it'll be the one after that. I want every pharmaceutical company to be a winner, because I want all of them to bring forth innovation that changes the trajectory of the disease for people that are facing Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, or prevents them from ever facing it in the first place. We have statins now. We didn't used to have statins. I want statins for Alzheimer's so people don't get Alzheimer's.
Okay. Another thing that pops in my head, and we don't have to go into real long detail on it, but
Sorry.
Nancy Reagan, no, I don't want it, because I know you're not the medical side, but I appreciate the information that you're putting out, because it's going to be good for people to hear it. And I appreciate you said that you're not from the medical side, so they understand your perspective. Nancy Reagan was against stem cells, but didn't they use, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't they use stem cells with Ronald Reagan, with President Reagan? With his Alzheimer's?
You know, I'm trying to remember. It's an excellent question. I think that, so I think it was actually Ron Jr. that came out in favor of stem cells, and I don't remember specifically if Nancy Reagan ever changed
I think she was against it, but I think that they wound up, and I could be wrong, and if someone knows, you can leave a comment below the show. For some reason, I think that she came around to them using it, because he died in 2004, and I know he had it for like maybe 10 years or maybe more. But for some reason, I think they use stem cells in him, but I'm not 100%.
Yeah, I apologize. I don't remember whether or not Ronald Reagan ever received stem cell therapy. If he did, it was obviously very early on in the evolution of that technology, and lots of progress has been made. You know, stem cells, when it was really, really at the center of federal policy controversy during, I think, the first Bush administration term, H.W. Bush administration, a lot of the headlines included the word Alzheimer's. And it was not, as I understood it, not terribly relevant at that time in our part of science, more relevant for things like spinal cord injury and other things. But you know, with everything in science, it evolves. And 12, 15 years beyond those days of deep, intense public controversy, stem cells have proven to be really important for biomedical research across a wide range of diseases. And they're not at the core of Alzheimer's research, but they're part of it. And I just don't want to see any legitimate lines of science cut off by politics. I want scientists to decide what has merit, and then let the Food and Drug Administration decide if it's safe and effective as a therapy. And then let the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services and private insurance companies decide if it's worth the investment to pay for the medication or the therapy for a patient.
Okay. With LEAD, do you work with the President Biden's administration or previous administrations at all with your organization?
Yeah, and I will say, you know, just speaking for myself, my organization, it's not that I hang out at the White House on a regular basis. That's not my level. There are probably some folks in our movement that have a little more access to the White House proper, but the role of our coalition is to work more in a day-to-day sense with the agencies of the federal government. So the National Institutes of Health, as I mentioned, the FDA, CMS, there's an alphabet soup of other agencies that we interact with pretty regularly. Even the Department of Justice is incredibly important to the dementia world. And part of that is that abuse, neglect, and exploitation we were talking about before, the financial exploitation, but also some of the physical abuse and neglect that goes on for people living with dementia. And it's also, I don't mean to harp on DOJ, but they have a huge responsibility making sure that there isn't fraud against the systems that pay for care, like Medicare and Medicaid. And that's before we even get into quality control at nursing homes that the federal government's paying for. So it's a complex network of responsibilities across the federal government, and we have a responsibility and thankfully an opportunity to work with a wide range of federal agencies to try to improve quality of life for people that are living with dementia and try to accelerate the day when no one has to live with dementia.
Okay. I got a question from a buddy of mine, and I know this isn't from a medical standpoint, but from your experience dealing with it, maybe you can answer this question. He's the lead singer of the 80s band, the Escape Club. They had a big hit, Wild Wild West, and a couple other songs.
Yeah, I remember that one.
He lives over in England, Trevor Steele. And he recently lost his father to Alzheimer's. And his question was, how do you say goodbye? Do you pick a time or just accept a long goodbye as a person that slowly forgets your conversation and history?
You know, it's one of the toughest things. And I don't think there's a single answer that's right for every family. So much depends on the family dynamic and how we define family. You know, for some people, that closest person in their life is not a blood relative, not a marriage relative. Maybe it's their best friend from high school. Maybe it's an army buddy. Maybe it's someone from their congregation, their faith community. It could become someone different in their last years than who it was for most of their adult years. You know, maybe their spouse was their best friend for 50 years, and then as dementia set on, it was actually a caregiver in their nursing home or their assisted living facility that is the closest to them. But I don't know. I'm not a professional psychiatrist either. I'm just a lowly lawyer by training with no actual legal practice experience. So take this as one person's opinion. I don't think you ever say goodbye. I don't. And I mean that in a literal and a figurative sense. You know, I absolutely understand why some family and some friends fade away. It's an incredibly brutal disease to witness. And I understand why some people, a lot of people, cannot emotionally tolerate that level of pain, witnessing someone they care about slip away. I get that. And so I don't judge when that happens. It's sad when it happens. It can be terribly disappointing, but I don't judge the person who for themselves has to make that decision to step away. But for those who stay, who who are able to stay, you stay to the very end. And that plays out differently for each individual, what that means and what that looks like. Sometimes that staying is literally being in the room with the person and holding their hand for 10, 12, 14 hours a day, even though there's no visible response to holding their hand. But you know you're there for them, physically and emotionally. And maybe it's talking at them and singing to them, even when they are no longer able to verbally respond or even physically show any response. And, you know, I think a little about the stories you hear about people that are in persistent comas and how important it is to keep engaging them, even if they don't respond. And I think of it that way at the last stages of dementia too, when everything seems to fail to register. You still try, you still make that effort. And you do that for two reasons. One is maybe something is getting through that you don't recognize is getting through. And if something can get through, then something should, because otherwise you're leaving that person isolated in the shell of their body, cut off from any engagement. So offer that engagement out of the possibility that it might be getting through or some portion of it might. But do it for yourself too. If you're able, and I don't mean to suggest anyone should do more than they feel capable of doing. I don't want anyone to feel guilty for a second for knowing when they're out of emotional or physical energy or capacity to do this. But as long as you have that energy, give, because you're also receiving. You'll know you've done all you could. You know that you've preserved as much connection as you were able. And you know that you sustained someone as best you could, as long as you could till their last breath. And then you're better able to handle what comes next. Because when someone dies, whether they die of cancer, whether they die of emphysema, whether they die of Alzheimer's disease, those that survive carry on. And how we will cope with our grieving has something to do with how we coped with caregiving. Whether we saw ourselves using that word caregiver or not, and a lot of people don't identify with that word. They say, I'm not a caregiver, I'm a son. Or I'm not a caregiver, I'm a sister. I get that. Don't worry about the nomenclature, about the labels. Worry about the feelings. Concern yourself with that. And if you know you've done everything you could, whether that was to the last dying breath or 5 years before it, you knew you did everything you could, then your grieving process, while not short and not easy, I think will be more successful, however you define success. And it's a weird word to use around grieving, but you have to get through that grieving. And it doesn't mean the grieving ends, but its contours change over time. And you'll be better able to handle your own grieving if you knew you did up to your limit for that person that you cared about.
Okay. And for the people here in Santino Park, this particular time is because his mom just pulled up and the garage door went up, but I can't get up because I'm doing an interview. So this is Santino on his camera time. He's union, by the way, so he's going to want 7 treats for this. All right. Before we segue into the second part of the conversations, I like to call these things. Is there anything else, Ian, that you would like to get out that I didn't cover as far as the Alzheimer's side?
Yeah, I would just tell everybody in your audience to get involved, find a way to be part of this. If Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia have never touched your family or anyone you're close to, well, there but for the grace of God go I, and give back and contribute to making sure that more families are as lucky as your family in the future. Volunteer for research, because research needs what are called controls. People that don't have a family history of disease, that don't have any symptoms of disease. They need people to be in that control group so they can compare them to people that do have a family history or genetic markers or risk factors or are experiencing symptoms. So you can volunteer even if this disease has never touched you. But the other way you can give back is make your community more dementia friendly, whether that community is your house, your workplace, your place of worship, your neighborhood, or your city or state or country. And whether there's an organized effort or whether you're doing it as an individual, to just be more attentive to the fact that, and this is true in so many ways, we're not all the same. And you're going to encounter people that maybe have Alzheimer's, maybe don't, but they're clearly struggling in a situation and maybe you can help. So you see a person, I won't say an older person because it may not be an older person, but you see somebody, say at your local coffee shop who's struggling to figure out.
Hold on, no, one second. Do me a favor, because the audience has heard enough of Santino on this show. Can you take them upstairs with you, please? Thank you. Go with mommy. Go Santino. Thank you. Go ahead, Bella. Thank you. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
Right. Say you're at your local coffee shop and you can see somebody at the counter struggling either to figure out how much to pay or even what to order. They're looking at the big menu board and they can't make sense. There are too many choices. Maybe you just ask if you can be of any assistance. Say, ma'am, can I help you read the menu board? Or, sir, can I help you figure out the change here that the cashier needs? Just offer. You don't have to impose yourself, but you can offer. Just in my family, we'd say, be a mensch.
Yeah.
Be a good human. Offer to help. Don't insist on imposing your help. Maybe you'll be warmly welcomed. Maybe you'll be turned down. Maybe you'll be pushed away, but you've tried.
Okay.
We can all do that in our communities to make a more dementia-friendly environment. If you see a law enforcement officer interacting with someone who appears confused and the officer doesn't seem real tuned in to what might be going on, carefully, respectfully approach the officer and say, can I help?
Okay. And you just epitomified my saying of every act of kindness. I always close out my show with every act of kindness is a little love we leave behind. Well, that's the perfect example of it. Okay. What I want to do is I want to segue into the second part. This is fun, random questions, whatever
All
you
right.
come up with. And I noticed you said Mensch. You're Jewish on your side,
Yeah.
your family? Okay. My father's side is Jewish. Berkwitt, my last name is Jewish. And I always tell people when I used to do a book tour for my book, they say, well, the name, but your mannerisms aren't Jewish. I said, no, I'm half Italian, half Jewish, which means I like expensive things. That's the Italian side. At a discount, that covers the Jewish side. So, and the word Mensch is great. What is your favorite genre of movies?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I took a few film studies classes as an undergrad and just loved them. And I don't know if this counts as a single genre, but I love my old movies. 40s and 50s film noir, those are great. But you could sit me down in front of The Sound of Music or The Wizard of Oz, and there are more fabulous documentaries than I could begin to list. I love movies. I don't get to watch as many as I'd like, but I guess if you force me to pick, maybe I'd go film noir.
Okay, great genre. Do you have a go-to movie that you can watch 100 times and it never gets old?
Okay, well, this one's pretty cliche because I'm a guy in my 50s, but probably Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, great movie.
Yeah.
Great movie. Okay. Favorite musical band?
So I'm not going to be able to choose on this one. Can I go genre and just say Motown?
Oh, okay, you could go. Yeah, I tell you what. Then give me a couple that you like off the top of your head. Doesn't have to be a favorite.
Okay, so you can't go wrong if you say Marvin Gaye. You can't go wrong if you say Smokey Robinson. But there are just too many to list from Motown.
Okay, that's two greats right there.
And we raised our son right. He loves his Motown and his Beatles and Billy Joel and yeah.
Okay, you did good. Great music. Do you have a favorite concert that you've ever seen?
Well, I've been to precious few, so I'll say Eurythmics 1985,
Okay.
an outdoor venue, and when they started playing Here Comes the Rain Again, the skies opened.
Oh, wow.
And we had a massive Kansas City downpour, so it's perfect timing.
Okay, Annie Legs and Dave Stewart. Great band. Okay, do you have, and it could be one or two, I know one is hard, solo artist, male singer, even if it's from the Motown, that's fine. Would it be Marvin Gaye again?
Yeah, probably. As Smokey Robinson's a close second, Stevie Wonder's a close third.
Okay.
A little too much disco influence for Stevie in later years, so that drops him down a little. But
Okay. Now reverse that. Favorite female solo artist?
Aretha Franklin.
Okay. Oh, you do like Motown.
Yeah.
Okay. Favorite noise or sound?
Oh, laughter.
Okay. Very good one. Now reverse that. Least favorite noise or sound?
Gosh, I guess pick something out of traffic, maybe a car horn.
Okay. Do you have a favorite food?
Not particularly. No, I've learned to like some things as an adult that I never thought I'd go near as a kid. So I really like Indian food, but I'll confess, with my Kansas upbringing, I never learned to tolerate really intensely spicy food. So I have to go on the more mellow side of Indian food.
Okay, and I'd have to ask you, like I said, my father's side is Jewish, and
Yeah.
you grew up in Kansas, which is, I'm not saying there aren't Jewish people there, but I don't think there's a ton of Jewish people.
There aren't a lot.
I could be
Yeah.
wrong. So as a kid, I know where I got it because I was born in New York, and then my parents divorced. My dad moved to Miami Beach, so I had the access of the best of both worlds.
Right.
So where in Manhattan, Kansas, as a kid, do you get matzo ball soup? If you like matzo ball soup.
So I am of New Yorkers, but I am not one. My parents were both born and raised in New York City.
Okay.
Yiddish was my mom's first language till she was about 5. I'm sure she was learning some English, but at home it was Yiddish. So, some of it was just good home cooking. But in the 70s in Manhattan, Kansas, the only bagels we had access to were white bread Lender's bagels.
Oh, gosh.
Frozen, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So those things were not acceptable. my dad's first university teaching job was in St. Louis, and was only there for 3 years. That's why I was born in St. Louis, because we were there for that position at WashU. But my dad had found, or maybe my mom had found when we were in St. Louis that time, a New York bagel shop. And so when I was growing up in Manhattan, Kansas, and probably for many years after I left Manhattan and my folks were still there, every time they needed to go to St. Louis or a family friend needed to go to St. Louis, there was a big order from the particular bagel shop that would make its way across the Show Me State and a chunk of Kansas to get to Greensburg. And at least then we'd have some decent onion bagels and pumpernickel and other things.
I haven't taken Deb back to New York yet, but I took her to Miami Beach pre-COVID in November of 19. And we're going down again, not Miami Beach. We're going to Fort Myers and St. Petersburg area in June, because I've been blessed to get inducted into the Florida Boxing Hall of Fame come this June.
That. Congratulations.
And, thank you. So I'm hoping that somewhere around there I can get some decent matzo ball soup and a good bagel, because you cannot get them in St. John, Indiana. You say bagel, and it's the best you're going to get is Starbucks. And I'm not saying they're terrible, but they are not New York style.
They're kind of terrible.
Yeah, they are. I was trying to be nice. Favorite dessert? How do you close out if you?
Oh, yeah, got to go cheesecake.
Okay.
But straight up, I don't mind if there's, the cherry topping or the swirl of chocolate, but I'm a traditionalist. I like just straight up cheesecake.
Okay. If you would hit the lottery tomorrow, the $200, $300, $400 million lottery, what would be the first thing you do? I suppose it's cliche, but you just give it all back. And there are too many ways to do that. I've been very lucky professionally, even though I'm in nonprofit. My wife and I really never got out of college style spending habits. So we've saved enough that we're okay, and our son will be okay. And we don't have a lot of wants and needs. So you give it all to something more important than yourself. My brother, who's a few years older than me, is a development economist. And so his work all revolves around trying to help countries develop their economies and work the ground up, solve the things that make it hard for their economies to develop, like, things like safe drinking water and vaccines for malaria and other conditions. And he and his colleagues have literally saved millions and millions of lives of children in the developing world, and across Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Latin America. It's heroic work, and there's never enough money to do the next project in that field. So there are things like that draw my interest. If I had those kind of resources, I suppose I'd fund my brother's work and the work of a lot of the students that he's taught over the years that have also joined that field. It's an opportunity to make an impact with, as I said, millions, tens of millions, potentially hundreds of millions of people that will never know you existed, and they don't need to. But their lives will be better, and their countries will be better, and the world will be better. And your half Jewish side will know the expression "repair the world." Repair the world.
And that is at the core of how my brother and I were raised by our parents. Mm-hmm. And it's not something that's in any way exclusive to Jews. We all have a responsibility, and we all have an opportunity to repair the world. And that doesn't mean we do it by ourselves at a full global scale. It means we do what we can, when we can, how we can, to the extent we can. And for some people, repairing the world is fixing the relationships within their own home. And for some people who are fortunate, who have the skill and the opportunity, like my brother, they get to repair the world, millions of children at a time. That's a pretty amazing thing to get to do. But everybody, whether they're repairing their own home or they're repairing the world, literally repairing the world, climate change, et cetera, they all need more support and more resources and more allies. And it goes back to my point about how we can all volunteer to address dementia, whether it's touched our lives or we've been lucky enough that it hasn't touched our lives. We all have something to give. And it's a matter of figuring out what you're willing to do and then finding an outlet for doing that.
Okay. Pre-COVID, favorite vacation destination?
Most of our vacations during our adult lives for my wife and myself have been with family. We both grew up in Kansas, different parts, but my folks, when they retired from university life, they moved to Northern Virginia. So it was easy to visit. But before that, we would go back to Kansas to see my parents. And we were very, very fortunate to be able to combine that with visits to my wife's parents, because they were in suburban Kansas City for their whole working lives. And then when they retired, they moved to North Carolina. So they, it was an easy drive to just go down there for, 4-hour drive. We could spend a week with my in-laws and really relax. And so it's always been about family. But if you want to get beyond that, the vacation my wife and I have never taken that we'd love to, when we can actually afford the time, and when we're post-COVID. My wife did a semester abroad and then a summer of during graduate school in France. And I think we'd like to do the grand European vacation, not just France, but France, Italy, Spain in particular, and maybe some other stops.
Okay. Ian, if you could meet one person from any time in history, dead or alive, any walk of life, who would you like to meet? And what would your first question be for him?
That's one I should probably be prepared for, but I've really never given that any serious thought. Boy, there are too many good choices. I suppose maybe I would go with Rousseau, but the particular question, I guess the nature of democracy and revolution are really fascinating to me. And the experiences of the French Revolution are so formative for what America became, good and bad. Our revolution preceded the French Revolution by a little bit, but it was heavily influenced in terms of how our country wound up. So maybe I go there. Maybe the policy guy in me wants to figure out how to make our democracy a little more perfect. Okay.
With everything we discussed today, in a few thoughts, how would you sum yourself up as a human being?
I hope I'm a mensch. Maybe that's all I can say. I'm trying my best to be a good person and repair the world. There's no way anyone does that alone. You do it by lifting up others who are in a better position to do it. That's what I try to do in the LEAD Coalition. By myself, I'd accomplish nothing. A lot of our organizations individually accomplish a lot. Together, they'll accomplish a lot more. And with support from the public, they'll accomplish, hopefully faster than we can imagine, all that needs to be accomplished in getting rid of Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. And when we get to a point where we can say Alzheimer's is just a memory rather than its memory loss, then we will have accomplished more than I can describe in terms of making the world a better place for everybody.
Okay. And finally, what is the saying, if you have one, that you live your life by?
There are a lot of good ones, but I always come back to Martin Luther King and the notion that the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. And you can define justice in a lot of ways. And, there are the traditional social justice movements that I'm deeply concerned with and passionate about. Voting rights and human rights more broadly, and those should be defined as broadly and inclusively as possible. So that's disability rights, gender rights, sexual orientation rights, and on down the list. I'm passionate about all that, but I try to bring that idea of bending toward justice to the work I do in the dementia community as well. And I think it may not be fair or appropriate to borrow from Dr. King in this way. I will ask the apologies from those who may find this an unfair thing to borrow, but I've said more than once to a lot of people that the arc of the moral universe bends toward the end of dementia. And I believe that's true. I think it's a moral cause as well as a policy cause. Dementia does such brutal harm to so many people that it's intolerable. It's not a condition to be accepted as a natural part of aging, which it isn't. And even if it were, it's not to be accepted. It's about the cruelest disease I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot. And I'm not trying to rank diseases and medical conditions. They're all awful in their own way. there's something about losing your memories. And even if you don't lose your memories, losing your ability for insight and judgment. I don't know that anything rises above that. There may be things that equal it in cruelty, but I don't know that there's anything much worse that comes to my mind. And God forbid anyone should have any of these terrible conditions, but this is probably the one I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy.
Okay. If you would, for the viewers, go ahead and tell them your website, social media platforms, and all that.
Sure. So the website's easy. It's just www.leadcoalition.org, and that's LEAD coalition. And then our Facebook page isn't much to look at, but I do most of my social media on Twitter, and there the handle is LEAD, LEAD, and then an underscore coalition. So
Okay.
lead_coalition for Twitter.
All right. And I'll close out like this. I appreciate your time today. This is a show I really want to do because I know people that lost loved ones to Alzheimer's and friends. And like I said, I personally had my Navy mentor that if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have been able to go into the fields that I did in the military and then afterwards with Department of Homeland Security in different places. So I owe it all to Leo. But I want to thank you because humanity for me is a very, very important thing. And these days and times, when you're seeing far too many people forget that there is a word called humanity in a dictionary, it's refreshing to me to have on people such as I've had musical artists and entertainers that really, really speak out and they care about humanity and different causes. So I thank you for what you're doing with your organization. I see what you're doing on Twitter. I'm glad that you DM'd me the other day because I was like, let's do a show. Let's get you out to my viewers. As I tell all my guests, you're all special to me in different type of ways. You have direct access to me now, Ian. So if you have something coming up or you have something you want to get out or you just need to get something off of your chest because there's information being put out that's not right, it's like kind of like Dr. Fauci and a lot of these doctors now are really being able to speak.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into politics, but everybody knows why. But they're able now to speak freely, which is a good thing for America. Yeah. You have access to me. I'll bring you on anytime you need. Just let me know, okay?
You got it, buddy. Thank you.
All right. You take care and be safe and be well.
Be well, my friend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, folks, if you remember, I've said this before on my show when I started back in September doing these Zoom interviews. Thanks again I always give credit to my friend Marielle Trump, who was my comeback interview, that I was going to open up my show to as much diversity, my favorite word in the dictionary, that I could, from all walks of life, from all entertainment, business, medical field, all of that type of stuff. Today was just that. As I mentioned in my opening, I had a friend of mine, very close friend who I lost in 2014, Leo Halpin, to Alzheimer's. He was my Navy mentor. I can't say enough great things about him. To this very day, I still miss him. And the grief is still there. So having Ian on, and I know and I'm glad that he said that he wasn't a medical professional, but he's got a lot of years in this. So he had a good perspective from the other side. All right. So these are the type of guests that I'm going to have on my show. Again, diversity is what you're always going to get with me. So hit that button and subscribe. Leave your comments below. To all my new subscribers, I greatly appreciate you. To my old subscribers, I appreciate all of you as well. The channel is doing very, very well. And we have a lot of new and exciting guests coming up again from all different walks of life. And I'm hoping you're enjoying them. Obviously, I think that you are because of the comments on Twitter and that you leave on the videos and with all the new subscribers. All right. So that's another Bad Brad Berkwitt show in the can. Forget about it. And remember, folks, every act of kindness is a little love we leave behind. Bad Brad out.